right, Ryan, it is so great to meet you. I see you all over LinkedIn in the world of research and customer interviews. I've come to know your posts because they all are prefaced with, I think it's a little balloon emoji,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's weirdly effective. Every time I see the balloon, I have to stop and read your stuff because it's always great. So, Ryan, thank you so much for being here. Super excited to talk to you. And so to start us off, could you just tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do, and yeah, what your
Yeah.
role is kind of in the world of research?
I'm glad you picked up on the balloon emoji. The only person that's actually mentioned that all the time I'm doing it.
Well, it works, and I know when you're like in marketing when you're doing these things, you're hoping that they have an impact, and sometimes it
Yeah,
just takes talking to somebody to actually know whether or
yeah.
not it's working. So it is working at
What
least
a
for me.
what a good segue into research. Talking to someone to know if it's working. Yeah. So about me. Thank you for having me. I've been in the business world for 21 years, which I can't believe it's true. I started off as in hospitality food service. And I wasn't in marketing; I was actually in operations, and they just sort of threw me a marketing hat when I became a director. And I was like, "Okay, I'll try this." And then I fell in love with it. It was great. It was more in line with who I was and sort of what I liked to do. But I after like my 5 year mark, I was pretty much done with hospitality. I'd grown up in the industry, so I went back to school and I took broadcasting. Became a TV and radio reporter for 3 years, and that was super fun, crazy fun job. Was not my future, and I was like, "Hey, I'll do the next thing." You can notice a pattern, and then I actually started working for a nonprofit that was here in Ottawa called Invest Ottawa, and they are like an economic development firm slash incubator, startup incubator. And it was like the first few months because I had business experience, I was asked to go and start helping all the startups with their communications and PR and some of their position and messaging. It was just really apparent that a lot of them did not understand in depth who their customer was. They knew they could tell you about the product all day long, but it was really hard for them to articulate why someone should buy them and like why they matter to those people. So I started that, and then I went and ran marketing for a software company, and then I've been in my own for about 5 years. But my entire approach has been foundationally in deeply understanding buyers, like why they do things, how they think, how they make decisions. Because if you can't influence how they make decisions, it's going to be really hard for you to influence them with your marketing. Like that's a core belief of mine. So I hope that sort of covers what I do. And now I run Content Lift, which is an agency for customer research. So yeah.
Right. Can you just briefly tell us a little bit about Content Lift as well? I want to get
Yeah.
into kind of the nitty gritty of what you do there, but yeah, just give us kind of the
Yeah.
broad strokes of what you do, who you help, how you do it.
Yeah. Like I am it. I am Content Lift. And really what we try to do is help businesses unlock how and why their ideal customers buy. And you would think, I think a lot of people think they know that, but a lot of times they actually don't understand the depth of that. And to give you a really good example, I just today I spoke with the founder. They're 7 years in. They've tried everything, and they've never done this type of work. Right? They're used to sales calls, trying to go outbound and pitch a product. Get it in front of people and think they'll buy. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help you understand your solution, whether it's a service or a product. How does it fit contextually into the worldview of these buyers? Like, why do these problems exist in the first place? What are the various approaches they've used to try and solve them? When they evaluate approaches, to use to solve these problems, how do they evaluate those approaches? Which ones they like and why? Right? What is the information they need? Where do they go? What stands out? What's irrelevant? Like that entire process for how they go from like, oh, this problem sucks to, oh, I want to pay money. And the reason I want to do that is people don't typically wake up and buy a product. There's a gradual progression of them landing on something. And if you can be the vendor or the company that stays top of mind while they go through that progression, your odds of becoming the person they choose are having will increase by vast amounts. It's there's so much data to back that up over the course of the last few decades. So that's what I try to help them do. Is just really build a go-to-market strategy It helps them de-risk making bad decisions.
That's great. And one thing I like about that is you're really kind of putting the customer at the center of the whole
Yeah,
go to market motion. It's kind of a crusade that I'm on personally, is like, making marketing more customer centric in kind of an increasingly digital landscape where, you know, there's always a temptation to measure quantitative metrics and clicks and,
yeah,
digital touch point attribution, because it's easier and we have the tools. And so we say, okay, well, if we want to understand our customers, we're just going to understand them in terms of these kind of easy to measure, but impersonal metrics
yeah,
that I can, easily look at in a spreadsheet. And the kind of the other side of the spectrum is, what if we actually sat down and talked to these folks and really understood what their pain points are, how, like you said, how they understand their problem, and then the kind of thought process they go through when they're looking for a solution.
mhm.
Um, so I love what you're doing at Content Lift. I think that it's very necessary and also like refreshing in a funny way.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
because I think
totally.
it's kind of the minority of approaches that are kind of being taken these days, but it's super
Yeah,
powerful. Um, so I'd love to learn more about your research process, and I
yeah,
think a good place to start is, I think it's in your LinkedIn headline. It's helping you run customer interviews that don't suck. I think that's
yeah,
I think that's
yeah,
about what it is. Love it.
yeah,
Again, see, it stuck in my mind. So
yeah, yeah.
in terms of being top of mind, you're doing a great job. But
Thank you.
why do most customer interviews suck, or why do
Yeah,
some of them suck?
yeah. Some of them is probably more accurate. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, right? So if you actually go to my LinkedIn profile and you scroll through it, you'll see like all the reasons, excuses, right? If you want to use a more like, um, you know, a harder term of why people don't do them. So a lot of it is sometimes it's we don't know how. Sometimes it's we've done it before and they weren't good. We didn't get really good data. Sales won't let us. Customer success won't let us, which is happens. Um, there's all sorts of. We don't want to bother our customers. We can't get them. Sometimes people are intimidated. There's a lot of SaaS companies out there that have their whole business model is they never talk to people because it's all product led, right? So that there's various reasons that that type of business model didn't even exist in the way that it does when I started. So there's a lot of reasons that they can suck. But I think for me, more specifically, what I'll tell you a story. Like I worked with a junior product marketer a few years back. I was just doing some general projects for a client, and they had reached out and said, "Hey, I just did an interview. It was like my first one, and I'm very excited to show you what I got." And I'm like, "Great! Like I'm excited. I want to see what you got, what you learned. That's fantastic." And they came back with like 4 sentences scribbled on a piece of paper. I'm like, "Okay, that's great. It's great. Mm, What? Um, let's watch the recording together." What do you mean recording? Well, did you record the interview? No, no, no. I just wrote down some of the key things. I'm like, oh my god. Now they just didn't know what they didn't know, right? They had grown up in a world where marketing's defined by certain parameters in B2B. It's either arts and crafts department, or you focus mainly on the product sells itself, what have you, right? So for me, how I think you get better customer interviews and run ones that don't suck is you have to have a certain process that actually gets you insights that you can then action in the business, either that day or over the next few weeks. Because if you don't have like parameters around what you're trying to learn and why, and get specific about your intent with these conversations, it's not going to give you any insights you can use. Right? It's just going to be a scatter shot because a lot of people just get on a Zoom call like this and they'll have a nice friendly chat, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's no intent or purpose behind it, and that is like a cornerstone of research. You have to have an objective and a hypothesis that you're trying to get at.
You are definitely, resonating kind of a theme that I've heard, across several episodes that we've done.
Yeah,
Um, that and everyone captures it in a slightly different way. I had one person say, the goals or sort of the business metrics that you're trying to move should serve sort of as a filter for your research process.
It
I
can.
had another guy I interviewed recently, and he talked about it's not about adding net new information. It's about understanding the thing that you don't understand about your customer and trying to remove that ignorance. And so
Yeah.
there's sort of different ways of capturing this, but you're essentially saying the same thing here is that you have to go into it sort of goal
Yeah.
directed, knowing what do you want to get out of this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you end up with maybe four perfectly fine sentences scribbled on your paper, but
Yeah.
what are you going to do with those? I guess becomes the question.
If I may, Zach, like those are what you just described are great, but to me, those are actually separate types of objectives, right? Understanding which KPIs or OKRs, whatever word you want to use, are different than understanding the gaps in my business intelligence. That's different than a churn interview. That's different than win loss. That's different than brand identity, right? There's various types of interviews you can have that inform different functions and parts of the business, UI, UX, right? So, um, yeah, like the reason why you're hearing all that is because there's different ways you can inform the actions you take in the business. That's why you hear all that.
And I love that you just kind of drew out that distinction there because it sort of shows there's a very superficial way to look at research, which is I want to go find some stuff out, and
Mhm.
then you can actually get really granular all the way down to yeah, we're going to differentiate our goals based on business metrics we want to move, or
Yeah.
yeah, we want to get into UI UX, anything you just mentioned. And so I think that's a great way to kind of draw out the granularity that you can have when you run really high quality research initiatives. And so to that end, I'd love to hear about what it is that you kind of do differently, and maybe that was already part of the answer here.
Mm.
But when you think about sort of the gaps that you see in uh, maybe how research is done elsewhere, and think about what you do, what you kind of offer as your solution,
Yeah.
um, what's different about you? What's I guess what's the secret sauce?
Oh man, I wish I knew. Um, I'll tell you what. I've been asked forms of that question. I'll tell you sort of how I approach things and how I think. So what I like to try and understand, and when I do what I do, I call buyer or customer research, but really buyer research, go to market research, marketing discovery. I've heard that term. I'm trying to understand how people go from identifying and prioritizing a problem or challenge to solve or a business process they want to improve. I do B2B, so it's like a business process typically that they want to get better at, and what is every incremental step they take to a closed one. I understand everything they did because then I know how to influence that journey in the aggregate. How I do that is I essentially take them through those processes step by step. Um, that's probably what's unique. One of the unique things for me is because I studied I was a journalist for 3 years, an investigative journalist. There's actually a specific process they use that's very similar to like legal to lawyers to any type of law enforcement investigation, where they're trying to understand a narrative, right? Like they want actions, they want timelines, they want events. They don't want opinions necessarily. They want behaviors, and that's what I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to get at. I want the incremental things that happened over the course of a timeline. So I build out that timeline and sort of tease that out, and that takes practice, right? Because humans don't naturally just give data and answers in the way that we want. There's a sort of a way you have to lead them through things to actually get the insights you need. And then probably maybe the last thing that is different about me, um, you know, I've been in marketing, operations, and sales roles. So I know the questions I want to ask to get the outcomes I want to inform my go to market strategy. Whereas I think sometimes, you know, a really good example would be say your customer success teams records calls. right? Or sales calls, their sales calls that they're recorded. You'll often hear people say, well, you can just go listen to the sales calls. And it's fine. That's helpful. Those are points of data, but they're contextually to that point in time where they're trying to close a deal or deal with a problem that a customer has or a challenge or whatever on board. That doesn't necessarily get to the things I want to know as a marketer for earlier on in the journey where I'm trying to influence them before they even know we exist. So I ask the questions in a way that will help me inform those actions. So, that's, I think, maybe what's different about me. I know there's other research that are similar in that way. And there's tons of methodologies that are like that. But I like to keep things very simple, right? And very basic. Like, where did we start? Where did we end? Right?
Well,
And what was the average?
it sounds very investigative. I think, the word that you
Yeah.
kind of use, as a journalist, but uh, yeah, really kind of scrutinizing that step-by-step process that they're going through before, they end up, paying for your product or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that you make a good point about, uh, if if we take what you said earlier, to be true, which is in order to do good research, you have to have a well-defined sort of goal or outcome in mind, right? Then listening to a sales call, it doesn't actually meet that criteria, because what is the goal of a sales call? It's like you said, it's to solve some problem. It's maybe to close the deal, so they're all the way at the end of the sales process. And so that conversation might have some good nuggets of information in there, but ultimately it's that conversation was not directed at understanding that kind of initial buying process. And so yeah, running research that is specific to that process, I think, is really important. um, One thing that I saw on your LinkedIn that I wanted to ask you about was it was a post you did at some point, and you were saying basically that insights live in the follow-up questions.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm starting to understand, yeah, kind of what your process looks like, that sort of investigative, iterative process. Can you tell me a little bit about what you mean by insights living in the follow up questions, and why maybe we don't get the answers we're looking for on the first go around?
Yeah. If you've done enough interviews, I've clocked about 1,900 now, which sounds like a lot, but there's other people who've done more than that. And so some of that, to be fair, is my time as a journalist. But you start to see a pattern of how people respond in that environment. And what's really interesting about people, to even take this environment, right? If when you ask a question, a couple of things can happen. One, they might give you a really short, brief answer. They might go through an extended period. They might go through an extended time period in a short time. So it's they might try and um, give a synopsis of a 2-year journey in like 3 sentences, right? Or they just don't remember, right? They don't have instant recall, so they may make something up that sounds good. So your job as an interviewer is to figure out how to get past that, because people don't have what you usually call like instant recall. They the brain doesn't really work that way for most of us. It's hard for us to actually like go back into the vault and pull things out on a dime. So or they'll give like vague answers, superficial answers. I have that in my DIY guide, where it's like one of my tips is like dig into vague and superficial answers, because then what happens is you start to get to the real heart of the matter. Peeling back the layers. And there's a few ways you can do that. They're probing questions. Why is your best probing question? People use that all the time. There's even a technique called like the 5 whys that some people use. I'm not the hugest fan of that, but the technique is basically, so tell me about the time you bought this software X. Oh, well, I was really struggling with this pain. Well, why? Oh, because this was happening here. Oh, interesting. Well, why? Why was that happening there? Like you're just sort of getting back to the nitty gritty of it. And that's okay. But, you know, y- I like that process of like trying to peel back things. So that's why the insights live in the follow up, because they just don't usually give you what you need that are actionable insights right away from the first answer. And it's so easy just to move on to the next answer when someone asks you ask a question, they answer it. You want to move on to the next question and ask it. but that doesn't really help you as an interviewer. You want to sort of dig into those things. I hope that sort of I explained that well.
Oh, you did. I think anyone who's been in research knows that the first answer that someone gives is not always the best,
Yeah,
and that you kind of have to massage the process, right? And the funny thing is, it's not like when you talk to a customer that they're being deceptive or not trying to give you this information, but it's like you said, it's if I put you on the spot and say, "Hey, why'd you buy this thing?" There's any number of sort of processes that could be happening in their head where they're like,
yeah,
I think I did this. They didn't actually do
yeah.
that. Or,
And
you know,
a lot of people don't actually think about why they buy things. Uh, and if you follow April Dumford, she's a Canadian like myself. She's very strong in like positioning messaging. And that's one of the things she talks about is, most B2B buyers are often buying a solution for the first time and they often don't know why they bought, right? Or they don't know how to articulate it, right? In the first pass. So you need to sort of, navigate that environment and sort of help that, pull that answer out of them because it doesn't always come out in a way that is helpful for you.
yeah, it's interesting because uh, on the one hand, y- if you look at the action they took, it's like they took out their wallet and spent their money on this solution, and so there
Yeah.
is clearly a compelling, concrete reason that they bought the thing, right? Because most people don't just part with their money for no reason. And then at the same time, if you ask them to articulate why they made that purchase, it takes work to get to that answer. So it's this weird sort of like
Yeah.
duality of you definitely did the thing, but you probably don't know why you did the thing.
Yeah.
And it's I think yeah, I mean it's interesting, but can also be challenging from like
Yeah.
a marketing perspective.
But and some
Um,
people do know, right? I've done interviews where people are like, I'll tell you all the reasons A, B, C, D, E, right? So there's all sorts of scenarios that happen.
I know as a marketer, I try to be as helpful as I can in those kind of conversations. Like if I do end up buying something, if I end up talking to them, I'll be like, yeah, I clicked on this ad with like this creative and I saw it on this platform, like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just want to give them kind of like because I know how hard the job is. And so, yeah, anytime you can kind of like provide those insights, it's helpful. Um, so I wanted to touch on just really quickly, when you are working with clients, so we kind of talked about the research process. Once you go through this process and you're, surfacing insights from their customers, what is the process that you go through to kind of integrate those insights into
Mm.
the organization? Kind of what do your is it purely just recommendations? Hey, here's what I would do. Good luck. Do you kind of get in there with their teams? So there's a full spectrum of
Yeah,
what the handoff or integration can kind of look like. So I'm just curious how you approach it.
yeah. Like most consultants, right off into the sunset for your work to collect digital dust from now until eternity. Um, Sorry, that was if you ever that's like the common thing about consultants, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends, right? I try to understand what they need. You know, um, I've done all versions of it. So sometimes I've been tapped by a senior marketing leader that knows how to do this work, it's done it themselves, but they don't have time. What they need to do is get insights because they need to build new campaigns this quarter to see results next quarter, and I can do it faster. I've turned reports around in as fast as in 9 days. Right now, there was a lot of luck in getting all my cohorts and samples aligned, and then turning things around. But it's amazing what you can do with technology now. So, sometimes they just want the insights. Sometimes I will give them recommendations, right? But I try to be very precise about where I think they can go and like actually this is what I think you should do. And to give you an example, I worked with a company where their technology was building. They had built software that helps large companies like Expedia automate chargebacks. And for anyone who's not familiar, chargebacks is like the ability for you to dispute a charge on your phone or online through your credit card, and the bank will typically, um, do that for you. And it was just the customer success teams of some of these larger digital companies were just drowning in chargeback, issues. One of the things that popped up though in all the interviews was these teams, these customer success directors, a didn't know how to deal with chargebacks, didn't know the best practices, had to build teams around them, like just had to learn all this stuff by sort of googling it and cobbling it together. So I said to them, and these are all like enterprise companies. So my one of my um, things was build all the education for them, right? Be
Hmm.
the go-to resource, right? It was very specific in what they could do. Now, whether they're going to do that or not, I don't know. And the last one is sometimes I'll get in there and do it. So if you go to my website, contentleft.io, there's a company called Rewind where I worked with the product marketing manager to help run interviews. And then I actually went and I helped wrote all the new ads. I did a lot of the new messaging stuff that got like plugged into the machine like the next day. And I will do I can do that because I've done that for other companies. I still do it. I still work part time for a few companies here and there. So yeah, it depends on what they need, Zach, because I everyone's different, but I always want to make sure they get what they need.
Yeah, and I'm sure that, as the person who's doing the work to surface all these insights, you want to see them, really get integrated into the
Oh
organization, and
yeah.
that's kind of a whole almost separate conversation of how you actually align teams,
Oh,
around
that's
insights.
super
So
hard. Yeah.
yeah, one follow up here, and then I have just a couple kind of wrap up questions for us. Uh, is I saw on your LinkedIn, you said something to the effect of companies continue spending money on the status quo, and I wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit because I think this was in the context of you were describing, why people they're resistant to interviews. Like you said earlier, oh, we did it before, it didn't work. Oh, let's just like crank out a quick survey, things like that. And so, yeah, kind of what are the problems that you're seeing, when it comes to research that kind of lead to companies just kind of treading water, or just looking at their competitors and saying, well, why don't we just do what they do instead of actually being customer centric and kind of customer driven in their go to market strategies.
So the question is, why don't they do in depth research?
Why
Um,
don't they do in-depth research? Yeah, I guess. Yeah, what is the barrier? I guess, um,
yeah.
or what are the yeah what are the common reasons that people say, instead of doing all this, this is too much work, it's too hard. We're just gonna copy our competitors, or we're gonna
Yeah.
crank out this really generic survey.
Yeah. Well, some of it was what I already mentioned, but some of the core reasons that I see, one is they just don't know what they don't know, right? Some people just
Mm,
never done it, so they don't know the value. Sometimes as companies grow, that sort of muscle moves away from the front lines and leaves with the founding team and that's been there, right? Sometimes it's politics. I know the customer. This is what they want. You to know. You're wrong, right? No, we know. And politics just kills companies, right? Sucks the energy out of them. Um, Sometimes it's just you know we know we think the product will sell itself. We have built. If we build it, they will come, right? If we build a landing page, they will buy. But it's not the case, right? There's a bunch of reasons. How I like to think of it is, I don't really talk about research to be honest, and I think there's a lot of other researchers on LinkedIn that I follow. I think understand that what we talk about is outcomes and business objectives and de-risking the odds of making bad choices. Capital efficiency, because that's actually what companies, pipeline quality. That's what companies care about, and I understand why I cared about those things when I was an executive. So I talk in those strides, but what I say is the key to unlocking those is deeply understanding the market and how and why they buy. Sometimes people get that quickly, and sometimes it's what the example I gave earlier. The founder I had lunch with today, they realized it after 7 years. They were just lucky enough that they had made enough sales and are still just getting by, right? But they want to change now. So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of reasons why people do it, and sometimes it's just time. We only have so much time. Let's just do what we see other people doing.
And that does echo, some of the answers I've heard talking to other folks, especially the as you grow, and the founding team kind of recedes, to like a higher level of the business. They're not really on the front lines. That's what I've heard over and over, and kind of a theme that I like to kind of advocate for or draw out is you know companies staying incredibly customer centric and connected to customers
Yep.
at every stage of growth, not just when you're a startup and you're having a ton of one-on-one conversations. I think the companies that can maintain that, can do really well if they can do that at, once they hit 1,000 people, five
Yeah.
thousand people.
I how
Um,
one way last way to articulate that is, like I said, I've been doing this 21 years. I started when fax machines were like what I used as like communicating. And that is the only way businesses prior to that and today have done well. All those businesses you see that we hold up on the pedestals that are like the 1% and have grown to like exorbitant amounts of market cap, that has been their guiding philosophy. You know, if you go and look at like the Jobs and the Bezos and all the other people we talk, if you really dig through what they highlight as a key function of what they do, it is obsession over a customer at all times of your growth and history as an organization. So if you think you're going to be somewhere, you're going to beat the odds over like who's come over the last, 6, 7 century of businesses. Good luck.
well said. Um, so I know we have to wrap here pretty quick. Do you do you have 5 more minutes?
I do, yeah,
Or you do? Okay. I just wanted to be
yeah, yeah.
respectful of your
No,
time. But
I appreciate that.
so I know you have a DIY guide that you've
Yeah,
published, and kind of on the topic of you helping to educate and support people in the research space. I wonder if you have basically what advice you have for researchers or people within organizations who are trying to level up their customer research. So and I want to caveat that by saying I've read enough of your content to know there's no one answer to this, and there's no what's the one question I should ask, type of
yeah,
thing. So I'm not looking for that, but if you have any kind of big picture advice for folks who want to be customer centric, the way we were just talking about,
yeah.
and really be research driven.
I mean, the easiest answer is start, right? I mean, that's like anything else. Um, I think, you know, y- but to be a bit more practical about it, figure out where the landscape you're working in. If you want to be that figure, like consider the environment you're in. Are people already doing that? Would you have access to customers? Would you have to get buy-in to do that? If you need to, some of the things we just talked about, like how you frame it, are important. An easy way, if you get hesitation too, an easy way is to sit on sales calls, talk to like work cross functionally across the organization. I still love that. I still talk to other teams and get insights from them. Those are all valuable, and they often help you They often help you frame how you're going to go do the research. So that is, I think, a first one. Two, make sure you understand the problem that you want to try and solve. It's so vital because you can talk about anything under the sun, and people are going to talk to you about all sorts of random things when you talk to them. Make sure you keep those conversations guided and precise. Make sure you talk your app you when you're talking to people, they're apples to apples as much as possible. So what I mean by that is an IT director at a hospital is not the same as an IT director for a Fortune 5,000 software company. They have the same title, but I guarantee you those are two completely different jobs, right? So if they both use your software, figure out why, what the variances are, because how you're going to sell those people are different. I guarantee you that. Um, Record the conversation. You will not remember. It sounds silly. It's easier now. Most people record things, right? Like it's actually compared to like 5 years ago, like that was an outlier of things to do. Today, it's actually much more common, but it still happens. Record everything, get it transcribed, um, and then share your insights with every single person that you work with. And don't presume they're going to understand what you're showing them, right? You have to actually have these conversations like why you did this thing. I there's a really good example is I worked that company Rewind I just mentioned. Like I've worked with them over the last few years and a lot in the research capacity, and it took time. It took me even correcting people in meetings when we switched to our ideal customer profile was they would say the old one and like, oh, just remember it's actually this now, right? And that sounded like arrogant the way I did there, but respectfully I did it like because I wanted them just to remember it. This is what we were focusing on, not that. So those are some of the tips I have. But just get started if you can.
That's great. I feel like that was like a high density, high value, 2 minute clip of best practices
Yeah,
in research. So that was fantastic.
thanks.
Um, Last question I'll ask here is, can you just tell folks where to find you
Yeah.
online? I know I've been talking up your LinkedIn this whole time, but just give us all the on ramps
Yeah.
to get more of your content and what you do.
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. There you go. That's fun. And just my website, Content Lift, right? Those are the only two places I really live. I'm in a bunch of communities also. Like there's got hundreds of different B2B marketing sales communities. I'm in a few of them. But yeah, I'm pretty responsive on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to message me, happy to chat. And if they want to go check out my website, I have a list now of 184 questions. Um, and I have right in the article like questions are not like a gospel. But the reason I have that there, honestly, Zach, is most of the people I work with or consult, they've never done this work before. So even just thinking of questions to ask can be hard. And so I want to give them everything they can to get started. So if you go to my website, it's just a list of 184 questions, but in the context of various types of interviews, you have that some of them I mentioned, like UI UX, win loss, competitive intelligence, whatever. So you can find me LinkedIn and then my website, contentlift.io.
Amazing. Ryan, thank you so much for spending time with us. That was an extremely high value conversation. Got a ton out of it, and you
Thanks.
just clearly are firing on all cylinders when it comes to research. So I
Oh, thank
loved
you.
getting to chat with you and kind of hear from you directly. And yeah, I would encourage everyone to check out your content on LinkedIn. Look for the little red balloon. Um, and yeah, this was great. Thank you again, Ryan. Really appreciate your
Hey,
time.
no, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. It's great.